I was finishing the lamb dish I had spent 3 months creating when my brother Marcus walked in. He had a woman beside him, someone who was about to change everything. Not in the way Marcus planned, with money and fame and his name on restaurant doors across 3 new cities. Things would change the way they always do with quiet people, slowly, carefully, and without any noise. The dish was a slow-cooked rack of lamb with a pomegranate and cardamom sauce. I added a smooth layer of whipped labneh and fresh herbs I grew on my apartment windowsill. It had become the most ordered meal at Solis, the dish that food writers described in long, loving sentences, the one that had made Diane Cole press her hand to her chest when she first tasted it. Diane was the investor now standing beside Marcus. She wore a cream blazer and carried the confident smile of someone used to walking into rooms and owning them. Marcus picked up my finished plate. He turned to Diane and said, "This lamb is one of my signature creations. It has layers, depth, it represents the heart of what Solis is all about." He didn't look at me. Not even once. I watched from my station, tongs in hand, and said nothing. After 7 years of working beside my brother, I had learned that silence was the most dignified response to what he did. He had taken my ideas so many times it had started to feel normal. The lamb. The charred cauliflower with date molasses. The sea-based dish with tiger's milk that had earned Solis its first big award. All mine. All his, in every room that counted. An hour later, dinner service ended. Marcus gathered the kitchen staff under the bright lights. He stood tall and neat, as he always did when he was performing for someone. He announced that Laurent Beaumont would be joining Solis as the new head chef. Laurent was known for his showy tableside presentations and his photogenic plating. And, more importantly, for being Marcus's best friend from cooking school. He had never run a kitchen longer than 18 months without some kind of blow-up. Then Marcus turned to me. "Maya, your contract won't be renewed. Thank you for your contributions." One sentence. 7 years, squeezed into 11 words. I put down my tongs. I took off my apron slowly and carefully, the way you do when you don't want anyone to see your hands shaking. I said, "Understood," and I walked out of that kitchen without looking back. People who knew us as children would have been surprised by all of this. Marcus and I grew up in a family that loved food. Our mother, Cecilia, cooked with a power that felt almost magical. Sunday dinners at our house were like celebrations. Neighbors showed up without being invited, and stayed hours longer than planned, and our father always ate with his eyes closed. Marcus and I both grew up loving food, but in different ways. Marcus loved the show of it. He watched our mother cook and saw a performance, the beautiful presentation, the big reveal, the clapping at the end. He was charming from childhood, the kind of person who walked into a room and made everyone notice. He went to cooking school, came back with French cooking skills and bigger ambitions, and spent his 20s working at well-known restaurants while building a public name. Marcus Reyes, the passionate, classically trained chef who cooked from the heart. I loved the quieter part of cooking. I was in the kitchen before Marcus and stayed after he left. I read cookbooks the way other kids read adventure stories. I kept notebooks, not for school, but for ideas, flavor combinations I dreamed up at midnight, techniques I wanted to try, memories of tastes I wanted to recreate. When Marcus came home talking about cooking school, I had already taught myself most of it. Alone, in our mother's kitchen, with no audience and no applause. When Marcus decided to open Solis, I helped him build the menu from scratch. He had the big picture vision, the name, the mood, the warm golden lighting. I had the food. We never made this arrangement official because we never needed to. We were family, and families trust each other. That was my first and most expensive mistake. Over 7 years, I created every important dish on Solis's menu. Marcus developed his reputation by eating my food and presenting it as a product of his own talent. He wasn't without skill, he could run a kitchen and lead a service, but the creative heart of that restaurant was mine, and we both knew it, even if only one of us ever said so out loud. My second mistake was staying quiet about it. What Marcus didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was that I had a secret life. It had started 6 years earlier, almost by accident. A food editor I met at an industry event asked me to write a guest article under a fake name. She knew I was talented and frustrated, and she wanted my honest opinions without the professional problems my real name might cause. I agreed, mostly because I needed an outlet. I picked the name Vera Fontaine and wrote a piece about the gap between a restaurant's public image and what actually happens in its kitchen. The response was strong enough that she asked for more. Vera Fontaine became a regular contributor. Then Vera launched a review column, detailed, bold, and deeply knowledgeable, under the title The Velvet Fork. I reviewed restaurants the way I cooked, with total care, deep knowledge, and no patience for performance pretending to be substance. I wrote about the difference between a chef's vision and a chef's ego. I wrote about dishes built to be photographed versus dishes built to actually feed people. I wrote about the specific loneliness of working in a kitchen where credit floats to the top and blame sinks to the bottom. The Velvet Fork became, within 3 years, one of the most carefully followed restaurant columns in the country. My identity was completely secret, a P.O. box, a separate email address, cash payments. Chefs feared a Velvet Fork review the way they feared a slow Tuesday in winter. A positive mention could fill reservation books for months. A critical one had, on 2 occasions, appeared just before a restaurant quietly shut its doors. Marcus had mentioned the Velvet Fork in my presence at least a dozen times without knowing he was talking to the person who wrote it. Once he called the column the most important voice in American food writing right now. He had been trying, unsuccessfully, to get a review of Solis for over a year. I listened to all of it. I said nothing. What I did with the money from the Velvet Fork and from consulting work Vera Fontaine took on for hotel groups and restaurant chains, was build something Marcus would never have imagined me building, a small business holding company. I called it Meridian Hospitality, and it was structured in a way that kept my name hidden from anyone who didn't look very closely. Over 5 years, Meridian quietly bought 3 struggling restaurant properties in the city. I rented 2 of them to independent operators at fair prices and kept one empty while I waited. I also invested money. Not in flashy ways that drew attention, but steadily and wisely, guided by the same patient and detail-focused mind that made me a good cook. By the time Marcus fired me from Solis, Meridian's properties were worth just over $4 million. I was not rich beyond imagination. But I was completely free. The morning after I lost my job, I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with my notebooks. I had recipes I had never cooked at Solis, dishes I'd been saving, almost instinctively, for the right moment. I opened one notebook to a dog-eared page and looked at the menu I had been quietly drafting for 2 years. A restaurant I had imagined but never had a reason to open. Now I had a reason. Marcus did well in the months right after he let me go, which I had expected. He still had my recipes. Laurent Beaumont arrived with great fanfare, a magazine profile, a handsome face behind the kitchen pass, and the 2 of them rode the wave I had built. The pomegranate lamb stayed on the menu. So did the ceviche and the cauliflower. Laurent made small changes to each, swapped a garnish here, adjusted a plating style there, just enough to feel like he owned them without the real risk of starting from scratch. The food press noticed nothing. Reservations stayed strong. Diane Cole finalized her investment in the spring, and Marcus announced the plan: Solis would open in Chicago and Seattle within 18 months. He gave an interview where he described his cooking philosophy as intuitive classicism and his inspiration as the honest, humble food of my upbringing. He did not mention my name. I read the interview on my phone while checking a commercial kitchen in a building Meridian owned on Halcyon Street, 3 blocks from Solis. I smiled and got back to work. The restaurant I opened 6 months after being fired was called Cece, named for my mother, quietly, the way I did most things. The space was calm and simple, natural wood, ceramic dishes, soft warm light. The menu was 40 seats, no long descriptions, just ingredient names written plainly. When the food arrived, it needed no explanation. I brought in 2 young chefs I had mentored over the years. Both had been underpaid and overlooked at their previous jobs. I paid them well, gave them real creative input, and made sure their names appeared in everything we published. The head of pastry, a woman named Rosa who had been cooking since she was 12 in her grandmother's kitchen in Oaxaca, was named in every review from opening night. This wasn't me being generous. It was simply what a kitchen should look like. Cece opened quietly. No big PR campaign. No launch party. No preview dinner for social media stars. Just a soft opening for 50 people and word of mouth from there. Within 6 weeks, we had a 3-week reservation waitlist. Within 3 months, we were named one of the city's 10 best new restaurants by 2 different publications. Neither review mentioned my name. I had asked my front of house manager to describe the owner simply as a local chef who prefers to stay out of the spotlight. This satisfied the curious and frustrated the gossips, which was exactly the balance I wanted. Laurent Beaumont's time at Solis started falling apart around month 8. The problem, as I had quietly expected, was that Laurent was a skilled technician without a creative spark. He could execute a recipe with precision, but he couldn't build one from a feeling or a memory or a craving. Once he had used up the variations he could squeeze from my original dishes, he started adding new items that only reflected his own taste, heavy, sauce-rich European preparations that felt completely disconnected from the warmth and layered spicing that had made Solis special. The first online review using the word inconsistent appeared in month 9. By month 10, 2 more followed. A well-known food blogger wrote that a recent meal was technically accomplished but spiritually empty. A group of loyal customers who had visited Solis every single month for 4 years quietly switched their reservation to Cece, where one of them told our host that the food reminded her of something she couldn't quite name, like what Solis used to feel like, a couple of years ago. I read that comment in a notes document my manager put together and sat very still for a moment. Marcus began to panic the way ambitious people panic. By trying to control everything more tightly, which only made everything worse. He micromanaged the menu. He brought in an expensive outside consultant who recommended trendier dishes and a flashier cocktail program. He was chasing a version of Solis that had already walked out the door, because the thing that had made it great was now 3 blocks away, cooking for a full house every night. I was checking a produce delivery one Tuesday morning when my phone buzzed with an email I never expected to receive. It was sent to Vera Fontaine, through the Velvet Forks contact form. The name on the email was Marcus Reyes. I sat down. He introduced himself with the careful politeness of someone who needs something and knows it. He wrote about Solis's history, its community, its dedication to chef-driven, soulful cuisine. He said he had long admired the Velvet Fork and believed a review would be a real conversation between 2 people who truly understood food. He said he would be honored to host Vera Fontaine at a time of her choosing, with his personal guarantee of a completely honest, uninfluenced experience. He signed it, with deep respect and gratitude, Chef Marcus Reyes. I read it twice. Then I made tea and read it a 3rd time. The request wasn't shocking. Marcus had been hoping for a Velvet Fork review for years. What got me was the tone. The carefully performed humility. The phrase, 2 people who truly understood food. He had fired me with 11 words and was now writing 3 careful paragraphs about mutual respect to a critic he had no idea was his own sister. I thought for a long time about what to do. I responded as Vera Fontaine. I told him I would visit Solis in the coming weeks, unannounced, as was my usual approach, and that I appreciated him reaching out. I said nothing else, warm enough to be encouraging, careful enough to give nothing away. What I did next was the part that surprised even me. I booked a table at Solis under a name Marcus wouldn't recognize and went alone on a Wednesday evening, wearing a scarf I never wore around family and a pair of glasses I'd picked up at a pharmacy. I ate carefully through 5 courses and took mental notes with the same focused attention I brought to everything. The food was not terrible. Laurent was, as I said, technically capable. The sauces were properly made, the proteins cooked with care. But there was an emptiness to the experience I recognized right away, not a flaw in the cooking, but an absence of meaning. Dishes that had once told a story now simply sat on the plate. The pomegranate lamb was still on the menu. Laurent had updated it with a truffle oil finish that drowned the delicate fragrance I had carefully designed and made the whole plate smell like a different, lesser restaurant. I ate the lamb slowly, fully aware of how strange it was to sit in a room where my work had been claimed and then quietly ruined. I wasn't exactly angry. I was something more precise than angry. I was watching, and watching clearly. I left before dessert, paid in cash, and walked back to Cecé's kitchen, where Rosa was testing a new corn pudding with smoked chili that made me stop in the doorway just to breathe it in. "Good?" she asked, looking up. "Perfect," I said. 2 weeks later, I sat across from my brother in a hotel lobby. He had no idea I was there as Vera Fontaine. He thought I was just Maya, his distant sister who had agreed to meet up after a casual text he sent the previous week. I agreed to meet him, genuinely curious to see him in person during this particular chapter of his story. He looked tired. The Chicago expansion had been pushed back. He had let 2 senior staff members go in the past month. The investment money from Diane was tied to performance numbers he wasn't hitting. We made small talk. He asked about my life in the polite, uninterested way of someone expecting a short answer. I told him I was doing some consulting and some writing. He nodded without really listening. Then he leaned forward with the intensity he saved for things he actually wanted. "Maya, I need a favor. You have contacts in the press world. I need an introduction to the Velvet Fork. I've already tried reaching out directly, but I need someone who can personally vouch for me, someone to tell them that Solis is worth a serious look." I looked at my brother. I thought about the lamb dish. About 7 years. About 11 words. I thought about Rosa and her corn pudding and the 2 young chefs whose names appeared in print every time someone wrote about Cece. I thought about our mother, Cecilia, cooking in that kitchen with a quiet power that needed no audience. I said, "I'll see what I can do." The Velvet Fork review of Solis was published 3 weeks later. I wrote it with the same honesty I brought to every piece, which was the only kind of fairness I knew how to offer. I recognized the restaurant's history, its importance to the city's food scene, the real technical skill present in the kitchen. I wrote about the pomegranate lamb in particular, about the beauty of its original idea, the careful balance of its spicing, and noted that the current version, while competently made, seemed to have lost touch with the emotional heart of the original. Great dishes are not just formulas. They carry the memory of the hands that first imagined them. Something has changed here, and the plate knows it. I wrote that Solis remained a restaurant worth visiting, but that it appeared to be at a turning point. That its next chapter would need not more polish but more courage. More willingness to be honest and specific rather than clean and general. I did not pour on praise. I did not tear it down. I told the truth about it, which was the most complicated thing I could have done. The review ran on a Thursday morning. By Friday, it was the most shared food article that week. Readers split cleanly, half saw it as fair and generous, the other half read between the lines and sensed something older and more personal hiding beneath the words. Marcus called me that Friday afternoon. His voice was controlled but tight, with something raw underneath it. "The Velvet Fork ran a review this week," he said. "I know," I said. "I read it. Did you have anything to do with it?" I paused, carefully, deliberately. "Marcus," I said, "I told you I'd see what I could do." He was quiet for a moment. "It mentioned the lamb. It said the original had," he stopped. I could almost hear the pieces connecting in his mind, slowly and reluctantly. "Maya." "Yes." "The Velvet Fork." "That's." "Yes." The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds. I counted every one of them. When he spoke again, his voice was completely different. The performance was gone from it. What was left was something I hadn't heard from my brother in a very long time, the sound of someone genuinely sitting with something they had done. "How long?" he asked. 6 years. He let out a long breath, not a breath of relief. The breath of someone who had just understood the full weight of a very heavy thing. I did not rush the conversation that followed. I had no interest in a dramatic showdown or a long list of complaints read out loud. What I wanted, what I think I had always wanted, was simply for my brother to understand what he had taken from me. Not just credit. Not just professional recognition. Something more basic. He had taken away the quiet confidence of a person who knows exactly who she is and what she can do, and replaced it, for years, with doubt. He had made me wonder, in the early hours of many mornings, whether my work was only real if someone with a louder voice said so. I told him about Cece. I told him about Meridian. I told him about Vera Fontaine and the Velvet Fork and the 6 years of writing that had kept me focused while I cooked at his station and said nothing. I told him without anger, because anger had been replaced a long time ago by something more useful, clarity. Marcus listened. He didn't interrupt, which surprised me. When I finished, he said, "I knew the dishes were yours." I always knew. He stopped. "I know," I said. "That makes it worse, doesn't it?" "Yes." He asked if Cece was the restaurant pulling his regulars away. I told him it was. He laughed once, a short, hollow sound. "Of course it is," he said. He asked what I wanted. It was a genuine question, not an opening move in a negotiation. I told him I wanted my name on the things I had created. Public credit, in writing, for the foundational menu of Solis. And I wanted his financial backing, in partial exchange for that credit, for a CC expansion I was planning for the fall. Not charity. A business agreement between two people who were also, still, despite everything, family. He agreed to all of it. The public credit came in the form of a feature article that Marcus himself pitched to a food magazine. He insisted on doing this himself, which was the thing that moved me most. The piece was titled The Recipe Collector, How Chef Maya Reyes Built the Soul of Solis. He was quoted at length, with no hedging and no attempt to protect himself. He said my name had belonged on that menu from the very beginning. He said the best meal he had eaten in the past year was at Cece, and that Rosa's corn pudding with smoked chili was the single best bite he'd had in 5 years of professional cooking. Rosa read that quote out loud in the kitchen and covered her mouth with both hands. The feature ran alongside a companion piece in the Velvet Fork, my final column under that name. In her last paragraph, Vera Fontaine announced her retirement and said only that she was a cook before she was a critic, and finds she has returned, with great relief, to the more honest of the two callings. Nobody publicly connected the dots right away. Within the industry, the guesses were immediate and mostly accurate. I neither confirmed nor denied anything, which was confirmation enough for anyone paying close attention. Cece's second location opened in October, with Marcus listed on the investment paperwork as a minority backer. Solis found its footing again under a new head chef, a young woman who had come up through Cece's kitchen and brought to Marcus's restaurant what I had always hoped it could be, honest, personal, and rooted in something real. I had a small consulting role during the transition, which I completed and then quietly ended. My brother and I began, slowly, the work of actually getting to know each other. We had Sunday dinners once a month. I cooked. He did the dishes, which felt, I decided, like exactly the right division of labor. We talked about our mother. We talked about the gap between who we wanted to be and who we had actually been. These were not easy conversations, but they were real ones, and I found that I preferred honest difficulty to comfortable pretending. One Sunday evening, Marcus was drying dishes while I wrote in my notebook at the kitchen table, new recipes, as always, the endless stream of ideas I could never quite stop having. He dried his hands and came to look over my shoulder. "What's this one?" he asked. "Lamb," I said. "Something new." He read the notes quietly. After a moment he said, "It's going to be better than the original, isn't it?" I capped my pen. "Everything I make now is better than the original," I said. "Because I'm making it for myself." He put his hand briefly on my shoulder. Just that, a simple moment, small in gesture but enormous in what it meant. I let it settle. Then I turned back to my notebook and kept writing. People sometimes ask what I would do differently. The question usually comes from someone who wants the lesson handed to them cleanly, one clear turning point, one tidy takeaway. I understand that feeling. I've wanted it myself. But the truth is messier and more interesting than that. The truth is that I stayed quiet not because I was weak, but because I was building something. The truth is that I am not someone who needs an audience to prove that the work is real. My brother's choices, as painful as they were, never once made me doubt what I was capable of. They only made me more certain. There is a version of this story where I stormed out of that kitchen and exposed him publicly the same night. Where I used the velvet fork as a weapon and watched Solis fall apart in print. I thought about it. I won't pretend I didn't. But the version I chose, the slow one, the building one, the one that ended with my name on the menu I created and my brother drying dishes on Sunday nights, that version gave me something a public takedown never could. It gave me proof, in the only language I have ever truly trusted, the work itself. The lamb dish on Cecé's menu today has no pomegranate, no cardamom. It is something entirely new, born from a different season of my life. People order it and go quiet after the first bite, which is the only review that has ever truly meant something to me. The reservation list is 4 weeks out. And I'm already writing what comes next.